The widow Katherine Caldwell stood in the dusty street outside the Fort Sumner Church, her worn carpetbag clutched in white-knuckled hands as Reverend Hollis pointed toward the desert road and told her she was no longer welcome among decent folk. The words still rang in her ears like the tolling of a funeral bell, and she could feel the eyes of every soul in town boring into her back as she walked away from the only community she had known since arriving in New Mexico Territory 3 years ago. The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on this October day in 1878, and Catherine felt each step away from the church as a hammer blow to her already shattered heart. Her first husband, Thomas Brennan, had been a good man who died of fever 2 years into their marriage, leaving Catherine alone at 23 with nothing but memories and a tarnished reputation. She had tried to rebuild her life in Fort Sumner, working as a seamstress and keeping to herself, attending church every Sunday and living as quietly as a mouse in the boarding house run by Mrs. Henderson. But then Robert Simmons had come to town, a merchant with smooth words and promises of security, and Catherine had dared to hope again. Their marriage lasted 6 bitter months before Robert's true nature revealed itself in drunken rages and cruel hands. When he finally left town with a saloon girl and whatever money he could steal, Catherine thought her troubles might be over. Instead, they had only begun. The townspeople had tolerated one marriage ending in widowhood, but 2 failed marriages, even if the second had been no fault of her own, marked her as cursed or worse. The women whispered behind their hands at the general store. The men looked at her with speculation in their eyes, as if a twice-married woman might be available for less honorable arrangements. And finally, this morning, Reverend Hollis had called her to the church and told her plainly that her presence was causing discord among the congregation. The wives were uncomfortable. The deacons had met. It would be best if she moved on to another town, somewhere her past was not known. Catherine had tried to argue, tried to explain that she had done nothing wrong, but the Reverend's face had been granite. In his eyes, she saw the judgment that would follow her anywhere she went in this territory. A woman of 25 with 2 dead marriages behind her was dangerous goods, a reminder of failure and mortality that no respectable community wanted in their midst. Now she walked toward the edge of town with everything she owned in a single bag, her savings amounting to $14.30, and no clear destination in mind. The boarding house had been paid through the end of the week, but Mrs. Henderson had made it clear that morning that she should not expect to renew her room. The seamstress work that had sustained her would dry up within days once word spread that she had been asked to leave. Fort Sumner was not a large town, and news traveled faster than wildfire through dry grass. Catherine reached the old adobe wall that marked the town's eastern boundary and stopped, setting down her carpetbag to catch her breath. The desert stretched before her in endless waves of sand and scrub, the Pecos River a thin silver line in the distance. She had no horse, no wagon, and no clear idea of where the next town might be or how far she could walk before nightfall. The sensible thing would be to turn back, to beg Reverend Hollis for more time, to grovel if necessary. But pride, perhaps the only thing she had left, kept her feet planted firmly on the outward path. That is a mighty small bag for a mighty long road. Catherine spun around, her heart hammering. A man sat astride a paint horse, perhaps 20 feet away, and she wondered how he had approached so quietly. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water under willows. His clothes were worn but clean, the clothes of a working cowboy, and a battered hat shaded his sun-bronzed face. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28, with the kind of face that might have been handsome if it were not so serious. "I am managing well enough," Catherine said, lifting her chin despite the tremor in her voice. She had learned to be wary of strange men, especially out here where no one could hear her call for help. The cowboy swung down from his horse with easy grace, keeping a respectful distance. "Name is Yates Donovan. I work at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of here. I came into town for supplies and could not help but notice you seem to be leaving in something of a hurry." "My business is my own, Mr. Donovan. That it is, he agreed mildly. But I also could not help but notice that you are heading east on foot with the sun already past noon, and the nearest settlement in that direction is more than 30 miles off. You will not make it before dark, and the temperature drops considerable once the sun goes down. Catherine felt her throat tighten. She knew he was right, but admitting it felt like another defeat. I will find somewhere to shelter. There is not much shelter out that way except for rocks and rattlesnakes. Yates pushed his hat back slightly, studying her with those calm eyes. If you do not mind my asking what happened, you look like a woman who has had her fill of trouble for one day. Something in his tone, matter of fact and without judgment, made Catherine's carefully maintained composure crack. The church has decided I am not fit company for decent people. Apparently, having been married before, twice in fact, makes me a corrupting influence. Reverend Hollis suggested I find a new town where my past might not be so well known. She expected shock or disgust, the same reaction she had seen all morning on the faces of Fort Sumner's citizens. Instead, Yates simply nodded slowly. That is a hard thing, but I reckon experience is not a sin, no matter what some folks might preach. Seems to me you have just had some bad luck in life, and that is different from being a bad person. Catherine stared at him, certain she had misheard. You do not think less of me for having been married twice? Why would I? Yates said simply. My mother was married 3 times. Her first husband died in the war, her second died of cholera, and then she married my father when she was near 30 years old. They had 20 good years together before she passed. Nobody who knew her ever thought less of her for surviving when the men in her life did not. She was the strongest woman I ever knew, and she taught me that character is not measured by circumstances, but by how you face them. The words hit Catherine like cool water after a long drought. She had not realized how desperately she needed someone, anyone, to see her as something other than damaged or dangerous. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had already cried enough in the past weeks to last a lifetime. That is kind of you to say, Mr. Donovan. It is the truth, Miss Caldwell, Katherine Caldwell. Miss Caldwell, then. Now, I have a practical question for you. Where exactly are you planning to go? Catherine opened her mouth and then closed it again, having no good answer. I thought perhaps I might reach another town and find work as a seamstress. I am good with a needle. I do not doubt it. But walking into the desert with no clear destination is a good way to end up in serious trouble. Yates seemed to consider something for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the horizon and then back to her. The Double R is looking for a housekeeper. The boss, Raymond Dalton, is a widower who has been trying to manage the house himself for the past year since his wife passed, and it is starting to show. The Cowboys eat better than he does most days, because at least Cookie knows his way around a stove. Mr. Dalton mentioned just last week that he needed to find someone to help with the cooking and cleaning and such, but there are not many women in this area looking for that kind of work. Catherine's heart leaped, but she forced herself to be cautious. Why would you recommend me? You do not know anything about me except that I have been cast out of town. I know you are willing to walk into the desert rather than beg for mercy from people who have already made up their minds about you. That tells me you have backbone. I know you have been married twice and lost both husbands, which tells me you know something about keeping a house and managing a household. And I know Reverend Hollis cast you out, which in my experience is more often a mark of character than a mark against it. That man preaches charity, but practices judgment. There was an edge to Yates's voice when he mentioned the Reverend, and Catherine wondered what history lay behind it. But she did not pry. Instead, she asked the practical question that mattered most. What kind of man is this Raymond Dalton? I will not walk into another situation where I am vulnerable to a man's temper or appetites. Fair question, Yates said, and his respect for her directness showed in his eyes. Raymond Dalton is a good man, honest and fair. He is about 50 years old, and he loved his wife dearly. He has a daughter named Sarah, who is 17 and away at school in Santa Fe. He treats his ranch hands well, pays on time, and does not tolerate drinking or gambling or rough behavior on his property. I have worked for him for 3 years now, and I would not stay if he were the kind of man you need to fear. Catherine studied Yates carefully, looking for any sign of deception or hidden motives, but his gaze was steady and open, and something in her gut told her to trust him. Perhaps it was desperation, or perhaps it was simply that she had nothing left to lose. If I were to accept this position, would I have my own quarters? I will not share a bunkhouse with ranch hands. The house has a small room off the kitchen that used to be the housekeeper's quarters when the ranch was first built. It has a good bed, a window, and a door that locks from the inside. You would have privacy and safety. And the pay? I cannot speak for Mr. Dalton on specifics, but he has always been generous. Room and board plus wages. Probably $20 a month, maybe more depending on the work involved. $20 a month was more than Catherine had made as a seamstress in town, and room and board meant her savings could actually accumulate instead of being eaten away by rent and food costs. It was a lifeline thrown just as she was going under for the third time. But she hesitated, some part of her afraid to hope again after so many disappointments. Yates must have seen her indecision because he added gently, I am not promising it will be perfect or that you will want to stay forever, but it is a place to land, at least for a while, somewhere you can catch your breath and figure out your next step. And I give you my word that I will personally make sure you are treated with respect. Anyone who does not will answer to me. There was steel beneath the quiet words, and Catherine believed him. She picked up her carpet bag and straightened her shoulders. Very well, Mr. Donovan. I accept your offer to introduce me to Mr. Dalton. If he is willing to hire me, I will do my best to prove worthy of the position. A slow smile crossed Yates's face, transforming it from serious to genuinely warm. I think you will do just fine, Miss Caldwell. Now we should get moving if we want to reach the ranch before supper. You can ride, and I will walk. I cannot take your horse. You are not taking her. You are borrowing her. Juniper here is gentle as a kitten and twice as patient. I walk plenty every day. One more afternoon will not hurt me. Before Catherine could protest further, Yates had helped her into the saddle with efficient courtesy and handed her the reins. The horse shifted beneath her but settled quickly, and Catherine realized it had been years since she had ridden. Her first husband had owned a small farm in Kansas, and they had kept 2 horses for the plow and wagon. But that life seemed a lifetime ago now. They set off northward, Yates walking alongside with long, easy strides that ate up the ground. For the first mile, they traveled in silence, Catherine grateful for the chance to collect her scattered thoughts. The enormity of what had happened that morning was still sinking in. She had been driven from Fort Sumner with nothing but harsh words and judgment, and now she was heading toward an unknown ranch with a strange cowboy who claimed that experience was not a sin. It seemed too good to be true, and Catherine had learned the hard way that things that seemed too good usually were. But as they walked, Yates began to talk, his voice low and conversational, telling her about the Double R Ranch and the land they were crossing. He pointed out a hawk circling overhead and explained how to tell the difference between a red-tailed hawk and a golden eagle. He showed her the tracks of a coyote in the dust near a creosote bush and described how the animals would den up in the rocky outcroppings when they had pups. His knowledge of the land was deep and genuine, the knowledge of a man who had spent years learning to read the desert like other men read books. How long have you been in New Mexico territory? Catherine asked, finding herself curious despite her wariness. About 5 years now. I came down from Colorado after my father passed. He and I had been working a small spread up there, but after he died, I did not have the heart to keep it going alone. I sold out and drifted south, looking for work and a new start. Found both at the Double R. Do you have other family? A sister back in Kansas who married a banker. We write occasionally, but we have never been especially close. She took after our mother's people, all business and propriety. I took after my father's side, more comfortable with horses than people. He glanced up at her with a slight smile. Present company accepted, of course. Catherine felt herself smile in return, a genuine expression that felt strange on her face after all the forced pleasantness of recent weeks. I understand that feeling. I have always preferred the quiet of sewing to the chatter of social gatherings. My mother used to despair of me ever finding a husband because I would rather stay home with my needlework than attend dances. Yet you married twice. The first time was for love, Catherine said quietly. Thomas was a kind man, a farmer with gentle hands and big dreams. We met at a church picnic, and he asked me to walk with him by the creek. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He died of fever 2 years later, and I thought my heart would never mend. And the second time? Catherine's hands tightened on the reins. The second time was for security, or what I thought was security. Robert Simmons seemed respectable when he courted me. He was a merchant with a store in town, well-dressed and well-spoken. But after the wedding, he changed. Or perhaps he simply stopped pretending. He drank heavily and had a temper that frightened me. When he left town with another woman, I felt nothing but relief. That is two different kinds of hard, Yates observed. Losing someone you love and escaping someone you fear. I am sorry you had to endure both. I thought I had endured them and come through to the other side. I worked hard, paid my debts, caused no trouble. But apparently, a woman's past is more important than her present actions, at least in Fort Sumner. Then Fort Sumner is a town of fools, and you are well rid of it. The simple declaration, spoken with complete conviction, made Catherine's throat tight again. She had spent so long trying to prove herself worthy, trying to live down a past that was not even truly shameful, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be defended. This man, this stranger who owed her nothing, had taken her part without hesitation. It was a gift she had not expected and did not quite know how to accept. They walked on through the afternoon, the sun wheeling slowly westward across the brilliant blue sky. The land around them was harsh but beautiful in its own way. All stark lines and muted colors, sage and sand and stone. Catherine found herself relaxing slightly, the rhythm of the horse's gait and the steady presence of Yates beside her, creating a bubble of peace in the midst of her upheaval. He did not push her to talk when she fell silent, and he did not fill every moment with chatter. Instead, he seemed comfortable with quiet, only speaking when he had something worth saying. As they crested a low rise, Yates pointed ahead. There is the double R. Catherine looked and saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley where a creek cut through the desert. The main house was a long adobe structure with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. Nearby stood a barn, a bunkhouse, several corrals, and various outbuildings she could not identify from this distance. Trees, cottonwoods by the look of them, grew along the creek, providing shade and a splash of green against the dun-colored landscape. It looked solid and established, a working ranch that had been there for years and planned to stay for many more. It is larger than I expected, Catherine admitted. Mr. Dalton runs about 500 head of cattle, plus horses for ranch work and breeding. It takes a crew of 8 men to manage it all, not counting Cookie and whatever temporary hands we hire during branding or roundup season. It is a good-sized operation, one of the bigger ranches in this part of the territory. As they descended toward the ranch, Catherine could see men working in the corrals, and the smell of wood smoke and cooking food drifted on the evening air. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had been too upset to eat anything that morning and had not thought to bring food for the journey. She pressed a hand to her middle, embarrassed, but Yates only grinned. Cookie will have supper on soon. He is a cantankerous old bird, but he cooks like an angel when the mood strikes him. You will eat well tonight. They rode into the ranch yard as the sun touched the western horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Several cowboys looked up from their work, and Catherine felt their curious gazes on her. She sat straighter in the saddle, determined not to show weakness or fear. Whatever happened next, she would face it with her head held high. Yates led them to the main house and helped Catherine dismount. Her legs were shaky after hours in the saddle, and she stumbled slightly. His hand on her elbow steadied her, his touch brief and respectful. "Wait here a moment. I will go find Mr. Dalton and explain the situation." He disappeared through the front door, leaving Catherine standing on the porch with her carpet bag, acutely aware of the cowboys watching from the corrals. She met their stares calmly, refusing to look away or act ashamed. Let them wonder. She had done nothing wrong, and she would not act as if she had. The door opened again, and Yates emerged, followed by a tall, silver-haired man with a weathered face and keen blue eyes. Raymond Dalton looked every inch the successful rancher, his bearing confident but not arrogant. He studied Catherine for a long moment, and she had the feeling he was seeing far more than her dusty dress and tired face. "Miss Caldwell," he said finally, his voice a deep rumble, "Yates tells me you are in need of employment and that I am in need of a housekeeper. He also tells me that you were treated poorly in Fort Sumner due to circumstances beyond your control. I want you to know that on my ranch, people are judged by their character and their work, not by gossip or superstition. If you are willing to work hard and honest, you are welcome here." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes again, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. I am willing to work very hard indeed. I am a good cook, a better seamstress, and I know how to manage a household. I will not disappoint you." "I do not believe you will," Raymond said. "Yates is a fine judge of character, and if he vouches for you, that is good enough for me. Now you must be exhausted and hungry. Let me show you to your room, and then we will discuss details over supper." He led her inside the house, through a large main room with heavy furniture and a massive fireplace, into a kitchen that was clearly in need of a woman's touch, and finally, to a small room off the back. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the creek. A colorful blanket covered the bed, and someone had left a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand. It was the most welcoming sight Catherine had seen in months. "Take your time settling in," Raymond said. "Supper will be ready in about an hour. You will eat with me in the house. The hands eat in the bunkhouse with Cookie." After he left, Catherine sat down on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. But these were tears of relief and hope, not despair. Against all odds, she had found a safe harbor. Now she just had to prove herself worthy of it. She washed her face and changed into her other dress, a dark blue calico that was less dusty than the gray one she had been wearing. She brushed out her hair and repinned it, studying her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked tired and worn, older than her 25 years, but there was a spark of something in her eyes that had not been there that morning. Hope, perhaps, or determination. Maybe both. When she emerged from her room, she found the kitchen empty but could hear voices from the main room. She followed the sound and found Raymond and Yates standing by the fireplace, talking in low tones. They both looked up as she entered, and Yates's expression softened slightly. "You look more rested," he observed. "I feel more human, at least. Thank you both for your kindness. I know you did not have to help me." "Kindness is just common decency dressed up with a fancy name," Raymond said. "Now let us eat. I had Cookie send over some of his stew and biscuits. I hope you do not mind a simple meal." The meal turned out to be far from simple. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned perfectly, and the biscuits were light and fluffy. Catherine ate with genuine appetite, savoring every bite. As they ate, Raymond explained what he needed from a housekeeper. The work was substantial, but not overwhelming. Cooking for him and keeping the house clean and organized, mending and laundry, managing the kitchen supplies, and occasionally cooking for the ranch hands when Cookie was dealing with roundup or branding crews. In return, he offered $25 a month, plus room and board, and Sundays off unless there was an emergency. It was more than generous, and Catherine accepted immediately. They shook hands across the table, sealing the agreement, and Catherine felt the last knot of tension in her chest begin to loosen. She had a job, a place to live, and people who were willing to give her a chance. It was more than she had dared hope for when she walked out of Fort Sumner that morning. After supper, Yates walked her back to her room, carrying a lantern to light the way through the darkened kitchen. At her door, he paused, his expression serious in the flickering light. "I meant what I said earlier, Miss Caldwell. You will be safe here. If anyone gives you trouble, you come to me or to Mr. Dalton immediately. We do not tolerate disrespect toward women on this ranch. I believe you, Mr. Donovan. And please call me Catherine. I think we have moved past formalities given the circumstances. Catherine, then, and you should call me Yates." He hesitated, then added, "I am glad I was in town today. I am glad I could help." "So am I," Catherine said softly. "More than you know." He nodded and turned to go, but Catherine found herself speaking again before she could think better of it. "Yates, why did you help me? Really? You could have ridden past and let me handle my own problems." Yates looked back, and in the lamplight, his eyes were very green. "Because I saw a woman being punished for surviving, and that did not sit right with me. Because my mother taught me that strength deserves respect, not condemnation, and because you reminded me of her, standing there with your chin up and your back straight, refusing to bend even when the world was determined to break you. I could not ride past that. I would not." With that he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Catherine closed her door and leaned against it, her heart beating hard. She told herself it was gratitude she felt, nothing more. She had learned her lesson about trusting men, about letting herself hope for anything beyond security and safety. But as she undressed and climbed into bed, she could not stop thinking about the way Yates had defended her, the quiet certainty in his voice when he said that experience was not a sin. She fell asleep faster than she had in weeks, lulled by the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night and the knowledge that for the first time in a long time she was exactly where she needed to be. Catherine woke before dawn the next morning, a lifetime of early rising too ingrained to break. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, determined to prove her worth from the first day. The kitchen was still dark, but she found matches and lit the lamps, then set about exploring the space. The stove was a good one, well maintained if a bit dusty. The pantry was adequately stocked but disorganized, and she could see that Raymond had been managing as best he could, but without any real system. It would take work to bring order to the chaos, but Catherine had never been afraid of work. She had biscuits in the oven and coffee on the stove when Raymond emerged from his room, still tucking in his shirt. He stopped in surprise when he saw the kitchen transformed, warm light and good smells filling the space. "You did not have to start so early, Miss Caldwell. I meant for you to take your time settling in. I am an early riser by nature, Mr. Dalton, and I thought you might appreciate a proper breakfast before your day begins. I hope I did not overstep." "Not at all. This is wonderful." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table watching as she moved efficiently around the kitchen. "You seem right at home already. A kitchen is a kitchen, whether in Kansas or New Mexico. The principles remain the same." She set a plate before him, loaded with biscuits, fried eggs, and bacon she had found in the cold storage. "I noticed your pantry could use some reorganization. If you tell me what supplies you normally keep on hand, I can make a proper inventory and let you know what needs ordering." "I knew I made the right decision hiring you," Raymond said, digging into his breakfast with evident pleasure. "My wife used to handle all of this, and after she passed, I tried to keep up with it, but I am afraid domestic organization is not my strength." "Everyone has their strengths, Mr. Dalton. Yours is clearly running this ranch. Let me handle the house, and we will both do what we do best." They fell into an easy conversation about household matters, and Catherine found Raymond to be a straightforward, practical man who appreciated efficiency and did not micromanage. He gave her free rein to organize the kitchen and house as she saw fit, with the only caveat being that she keep his late wife's personal belongings in the chest in his room undisturbed. Catherine agreed readily, understanding the need to preserve those memories. After Raymond headed out to begin his day, Catherine threw herself into her work with fierce determination. She swept and scrubbed, organized the pantry, made a detailed list of supplies needed, and planned out meals for the week. She found linens that needed mending and set them aside for evening work. She aired out the main room and washed the windows until they sparkled. By the time the sun reached its zenith, she had transformed the house from a bachelor's disorganized space into a home that showed care and attention. She was kneading bread dough when she heard a knock at the kitchen door. She wiped her flurry hands on her apron and opened it to find Yates standing there with his hat in his hands, his dark hair damp as if he had just dunked his head in the horse trough. "Afternoon, Catherine. I wanted to check and see how your first morning went." "Quite well, thank you. Mr. Dalton seems pleased so far, and I am finding everything I need to do my work properly." "That is good. I am glad." He shifted his weight slightly, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I also wanted to ask if you might need anything from town. I am heading into Fort Sumner tomorrow morning to pick up some equipment Mr. Dalton ordered, and if you need supplies or have any business to attend to, I could handle it for you." Catherine stiffened at the mention of Fort Sumner. "I have no business in that town, now or ever, but I appreciate the offer." "I understand, but if there are supplies you need for the kitchen or personal items, I could purchase them on your behalf. No one needs to know they are for you." It was a practical offer, and Catherine forced herself to think past her anger at Fort Sumner's treatment. She did need a few things, items she had not been able to pack in her hasty departure. "If you truly do not mind, I could use some sewing notions. Thread, needles, perhaps some fabric if the general store has anything practical, and some lavender soap if they carry it. I can give you money. Keep your money until you have been paid. I will put it on Mr. Dalton's account, and you can settle up when he pays you at month's end. Make me a list of exactly what you need, and I will do my best to find it." Catherine invited him in while she wrote out a careful list, trying not to be too aware of his presence in the kitchen. He was a large man, but he moved with a quiet grace that kept him from feeling intrusive. He leaned against the counter, watching her work the bread dough with obvious interest. "You make that look easy." "It is easy once you learn the feel of it. Too much flour, and the bread is dense. Too little, and it will not rise properly. You have to find the balance." She shaped the dough into loaves and set them in pans to rise. "Did your mother teach you to cook?" "She tried, but I was never much good at anything more complicated than beans and bacon. My sister got the cooking talent in the family. I got the knack for working with horses. Everyone has their gifts. Mine just happens to be domestic." "It is not just domestic," Yates said thoughtfully. "It is making a place feel like a home, making people feel cared for. That is a real gift, Catherine. Do not sell yourself short." She looked up, startled by the insight. Most people saw housekeeping as simple women's work, necessary, but not particularly skilled. But Yates seemed to understand that there was an art to it, a way of putting heart into the everyday tasks that transformed them into something more. "Thank you for saying that. I am just speaking the truth as I see it." He straightened and settled his hat back on his head. "I should let you get back to your work. I will see you tomorrow evening with your supplies." After he left, Catherine stood for a moment in the quiet kitchen, her hands resting on the warm surface of the table. She could not remember the last time a man had spoken to her the way Yates did, with respect and genuine interest, as if her thoughts and feelings mattered. Thomas had in the early days of their marriage, but illness had stolen him before they could truly build a life together. And Robert had never spoken to her with anything but criticism or demands. But Yates was different. He listened when she spoke. He saw her as a person, not just a woman to be managed or controlled. It was dangerous territory, this growing awareness of him, but Catherine could not seem to help herself. She threw herself back into her work, determined not to dwell on feelings that could only lead to trouble. She had learned her lesson about romantic notions. Safety and security were what mattered, not the flutter in her chest when a green-eyed cowboy smiled at her. The next evening, true to his word, Yates returned with her supplies. He had found everything on her list and had thrown in a few extras as well, including a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy and a small bag of peppermints. "The book belonged to my mother," he explained. "I have been carrying it around for years, but I think she would want someone to read it and enjoy it rather than have it gathering dust in my saddlebag." Catherine accepted the gifts with hands that trembled slightly. "I could not take your mother's book, Yates. It must have sentimental value. It does, which is why I want you to have it. My mother loved poetry, and she loved sharing that love with others. She would be happy to know her book brought pleasure to someone else." He pressed it into her hands gently. "Please, I would consider it an honor." Catherine clutched the small, worn volume to her chest, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Then I will treasure it. Thank you." They stood in the kitchen doorway, the evening light painting everything in shades of rose and gold. And Catherine felt something shift between them. It was subtle, barely there, but undeniable. A connection forming, a recognition of kindred spirits finding each other in the vast loneliness of the desert. She knew she should step back, put distance between them before this fragile thing could grow into something dangerous. But she did not. Instead, she smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes, and watched his face light up in response. "Would you like to stay for supper?" The words were out before she could stop them. "I made too much stew, and it seems a shame to let it go to waste. I would like that very much." They ate together at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. Yates told her about the horses he was training, his dream of eventually having his own small ranch where he could focus on breeding good working stock. Catherine told him about the quilt pattern she wanted to try, her love of reading, and her secret desire to someday have a garden full of flowers. The conversation flowed easily, without awkwardness or strain, and Catherine realized with a start that she was enjoying herself, more than enjoying herself. She felt alive in a way she had not in years, as if some dormant part of her heart was stirring back to wakefulness. It was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. But when Yates looked at her across the table, his eyes warm in the lamplight, Catherine could not bring herself to care. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt like more than a survivor. She felt like a woman with a future that might hold more than just safety and work. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Catherine worked hard during the days, bringing order and comfort to the ranch house. Raymond was openly delighted with her work, telling her repeatedly that he had not eaten so well or lived so comfortably since his wife passed. The other ranch hands treated her with careful respect, tipping their hats when they passed and thanking her on the occasions when she brought fresh-baked goods to the bunkhouse. And Yates found reasons to stop by the kitchen every day, sometimes with a legitimate errand, sometimes with nothing more than a friendly word and a smile that made Catherine's heart skip. She told herself she was being foolish. She had no business thinking about Yates in romantic terms. She was a twice-married woman working as a housekeeper, and he was a cowboy with dreams of his own. Their paths had crossed by chance, and she should be grateful for his friendship without wanting more. But her heart paid no attention to her sensible thoughts. It noticed the way Yates always made sure she had enough firewood stacked by the kitchen door. It noticed how he fixed the loose hinge on the pantry without being asked. It noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that was part wonder and part longing. One evening in early November, as Catherine was cleaning up after supper, Yates appeared at the kitchen door with a bundle of wildflowers. They were desert blooms, hardy plants that somehow managed to produce delicate flowers even in the harsh landscape. "I remembered you saying you wanted a flower garden someday," he said almost shyly. "These will not last long once they are picked, but I thought you might enjoy them while they do." Catherine took the flowers with shaking hands, pressing her face to the blooms to hide the tears that threatened. No one had brought her flowers since Thomas. "They are beautiful, thank you." "Catherine, Yates said her name like a prayer, and when she looked up, she found him watching her with such naked emotion that her breath caught. I need to tell you something, and I hope it will not make things awkward between us. I have tried to keep it to myself, but I am not good at pretending. What is it? I am falling in love with you. The words were simple and direct, without flowery speeches or elaborate declarations. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing on that road with your chin up and your eyes full of fire, and every day since then, I have fallen a little more. The way you hum when you are kneading bread, the way you always have a kind word for the ranch hands, even the rough ones, the way you read poetry in the evening when you think no one is watching, the way you have made this house feel like a home again, not just for Mr. Dalton, but for all of us. Catherine set the flowers down carefully, her hands trembling. Yates, I do not know what to say. I am not good marriage material. I have proven that twice over. No, he said fiercely, crossing the kitchen in two strides to stand before her. You have proven that you are strong and resilient and capable of surviving terrible loss and unfair treatment. You have proven that you have a heart big enough to love, even when loving cost you dearly. That is not failure, Catherine. That is courage. The world does not see it that way. Then the world is wrong. He took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am not even asking you to say you love me back, though I hope maybe someday you might. I am just asking you to give us a chance. Let me court you properly. Let me show you that not all men will hurt you or leave you. Let me prove that experience is not a sin and that you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are. Catherine looked up into his face, seeing nothing but sincerity and hope. Her practical side screamed warnings, listing all the reasons this was a terrible idea. But her heart, that battered, resilient organ, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she deserved one more chance at happiness. I am afraid, she admitted. I am so afraid of being hurt again. I know. And I cannot promise I will never hurt you because people are imperfect and we all make mistakes. But I can promise I will never deliberately cause you pain. I can promise I will respect you and honor you and stand by you come what may. I can promise that if you give me your heart, I will guard it as carefully as I guard my own. I think, Catherine said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, that I am already falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me. Yates's face blazed with joy. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Then we will be terrified together. And maybe, in time, we will find that love is worth the fear. From that evening forward, everything changed and nothing changed. Catherine continued her work at the ranch, and Yates continued his. But now there were stolen moments in the kitchen when he would help her with dishes, their hands touching in the soapy water. There were evening walks by the creek when the work was done, talking about dreams and hopes and the shape they wanted their futures to take. There were shy touches, a hand on an arm, fingers brushing as they passed each other in the barn. And there were kisses, sweet and tender, full of promise and possibility. Raymond noticed, of course. He was not a foolish man. But rather than disapproval, Catherine saw only pleasure in his eyes. One evening, about 3 weeks after Yates's declaration, Raymond asked her to sit with him after supper. Her heart pounded, afraid he would tell her that romance between his employees was not acceptable. Instead, he smiled kindly and said, Yates is a good man, Catherine, one of the best I have ever known. If he has set his cap for you, then he has chosen well, and so have you if you return his feelings. You do not think it inappropriate? I am your housekeeper. You are a woman who deserves happiness, and housekeepers fall in love just like everyone else. As long as your work does not suffer, I have no objection. In fact, I would be pleased to see two people I care about find joy together. Thank you, Mr. Dalton. That means more than I can say. You have brought life back to this house, Catherine. You have reminded me that caring for a home and the people in it is not a burden but a blessing. I only hope Yates knows how lucky he is. I think he does, and I hope he knows I feel equally lucky. As winter settled over the New Mexico territory, bringing cold nights and occasional snow, Catherine's relationship with Yates deepened. He courted her with old-fashioned propriety, always respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He brought her small gifts, items he made himself, a wooden box for her sewing notions, a shelf for her kitchen herbs, a bench for outside her door so she could sit and watch the sunset. He read poetry with her in the evenings, his deep voice stumbling over the verses, but his effort touching her deeply. And he listened to her, really listened when she talked about her past, her fears, her hopes for the future. Catherine had never experienced a courtship like this. Thomas had courted her quickly, urgently, as if afraid she might slip away if he did not secure her promise. Robert had not courted her at all, merely presented himself as a solution to her widowhood and expected her gratitude. But Yates courted her as if she were precious, as if knowing her was a privilege, as if her happiness mattered more than his own desires. It was intoxicating and healing in equal measure. In December, a letter arrived for Raymond from his daughter Sarah, announcing that she would be coming home for Christmas. Raymond was overjoyed, but also anxious. Sarah has not been home since her mother died, he confided to Catherine. I worry that the house will feel empty to her without her mother's presence. I worry that I have not done enough to keep her mother's memory alive. The house is full of her mother's presence, Catherine said gently. The quilts on the beds, the dishes we eat from, the garden she planted that still blooms every spring. Your wife is woven into every corner of this place, and your daughter will feel that. And if she needs to talk about her mother, if she needs to grieve, you will be here to listen and remember with her. That is what she needs most, your presence and your love. Raymond's eyes were suspiciously bright. You are a wise woman, Katherine Caldwell. Thank you. Sarah arrived 2 days before Christmas, a lovely girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. She was wary at first, clearly uncertain about finding another woman in her mother's kitchen, but Catherine made no attempt to replace Sarah's mother or claim territory. Instead, she welcomed Sarah warmly and then stepped back, giving the girl space to reconnect with her father and her home. She offered to teach Sarah some of her mother's recipes that Raymond had mentioned, and she listened when Sarah wanted to talk about her memories. Gradually, Sarah relaxed, and by Christmas Eve, she was laughing and talking with Catherine as if they had known each other for years. On Christmas morning, Catherine woke to find a small package outside her door. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a chain, and tucked inside the locket was a tiny, carefully pressed wildflower, one of the blooms Yates had brought her that first evening. The note with it read simply, "So you will always remember that beauty can bloom even in the desert. Yours always, Yates." Catherine wore the locket to Christmas dinner, and when Yates arrived with the other ranch hands for the meal, his eyes went straight to the silver glinting at her throat. She touched it lightly and smiled at him, a private communication that needed no words. He smiled back, and Catherine felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire blazing in the hearth. After the meal, as Catherine was cleaning up, Sarah came into the kitchen and said quietly, "He loves you very much. Yates, I mean. I can see it in the way he looks at you." Catherine glanced at the girl, surprised. "Does that bother you? I know this was your mother's kitchen." "It was my mother's kitchen, and now it is yours. That does not diminish what she meant to this house or to us. You have made my father happy again, and you have made this house feel like a home instead of a museum to grief. My mother would have liked you, I think. She always said that love multiplies, it does not divide. There is room in this house and in our hearts for both her memory and your presence." The simple acceptance, the generosity of spirit from this young woman brought tears to Catherine's eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. You do not know what that means to me." I think I do. My father told me about what happened in Fort Sumner, about how you were treated. It was wrong and cruel, but I am glad it happened in a way because it brought you here. You belong here, Catherine. I hope you will stay. I hope so too. As the winter progressed into the new year of 1879, Catherine found herself more content than she had been in her entire adult life. She loved her work, took pride in the home she was maintaining, and felt genuinely cared for by Raymond and the ranch hands. But most of all, she loved Yates, with a depth and certainty that still sometimes took her breath away. He was everything Robert had not been, gentle where Robert had been harsh, supportive where Robert had been controlling, honest where Robert had been manipulative. And he was everything Thomas had been, but with a maturity and steadiness that Thomas, for all his kindness, had lacked. In February, as Catherine was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Yates found her and said quietly, "Walk with me. I have something I want to show you." Curious, Catherine followed him away from the ranch buildings, along the creek toward a small rise she had noticed but never explored. As they climbed, Yates took her hand, helping her over the rough spots, and Catherine felt the rightness of his touch, the way her hand fit perfectly in his. At the top of the rise, he stopped and gestured toward the view. From here she could see the entire ranch spread out below, the house and barns and corrals, the cattle grazing in the distance, the creek winding through the valley like a silver thread. It was beautiful and peaceful, a perfect little kingdom carved out of the harsh desert. "I own this land," Yates said quietly. "Not the ranch, but this piece here. 20 acres that I bought 2 years ago with my savings. I have been planning to build a house here someday, a small place where I could start my own horse breeding operation while still working for Mr. Dalton. I have been saving and planning, but I always thought I would be doing it alone." He turned to face her, his green eyes intense. "I do not want to do it alone anymore, Catherine. I want to build a home here with you. I want to wake up every morning with you beside me and fall asleep every night holding you. I want to build a life with you. Fill that house with love and laughter, and maybe, if we are blessed children. I am asking you to marry me, Katherine Caldwell, not because you need security or because I need a housekeeper, but because I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that love every single day." Catherine's vision blurred with tears. She thought of all the reasons she should say no, all the fears that still lingered, but they seemed small and distant compared to the overwhelming certainty that this man, this moment, was her future. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Donovan. I will build a life with you and love you for as long as I draw breath." He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he finally set her down, he kissed her properly, deeply, a kiss full of promise and passion and profound joy. Catherine kissed him back with all the love in her heart, no longer afraid of what the future might bring. They were married in March on a warm afternoon when the desert was beginning to bloom. Raymond stood as Yates's best man, and Sarah served as Catherine's attendant. The ceremony took place on the rise where Yates had proposed, with a traveling preacher officiating and the entire ranch crew in attendance. Catherine wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Yates had purchased, a soft blue that matched the spring sky. Yates wore his best clothes and a look of such naked happiness that several of the ranch hands had to clear their throats and look away. The preacher kept the ceremony simple and brief, speaking about love and commitment and the courage it takes to trust another person with your heart. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, there was only warm silence. And when he pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled crowd echoed across the valley. Raymond hosted a celebration at the ranch house, with music and dancing and more food than even Cookie's best efforts could match. Catherine danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling lighter than air, when Yates pulled her close and whispered, "Hello, Mrs. Donovan." She laughed out loud, a sound of pure delight. She had been Miss Brennan, and then Mrs. Brennan, and then Mrs. Simmons, each name carrying weight and sorrow. But Mrs. Donovan felt different. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start, a name she could grow into and make her own. That night, in the small room that had been Catherine's but was now theirs until they could build their house, Yates loved her with tenderness and patience, making sure she felt cherished and desired. Catherine, who had known pain and duty in the marriage bed, but never genuine pleasure, discovered that intimacy could be beautiful when it was given and received freely, without fear or obligation. She fell asleep in Yates's arms, feeling safe and loved and profoundly grateful for the strange turns of fate that had led her to this moment. In the weeks that followed, they began building their house on the rise. Yates did much of the work himself, with help from the ranch hands on their days off. Catherine worked beside him when she could, helping to mix adobe and lay bricks and plan the interior layout. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way that nothing else had ever been. This was not a house she was simply maintaining for someone else. This was her home, built with her own hands and her husband's, a physical manifestation of the life they were creating together. The house took shape slowly through the spring and into the summer. It was not large, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was solidly built and positioned to catch the breeze and the view. Catherine planned where her kitchen would go, where they would sleep, where they might someday add on a room for children if they were blessed with them. She designed a small garden plot near the back door where she could grow vegetables and herbs and finally the flowers she had always wanted. In May, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening as they were sitting on the half-finished porch of their new house, watching the sun set over the desert. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if he could not quite process the words. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt his shoulders shake with silent tears. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you for this gift, for giving me everything I never dared to hope for." "We made this gift together," Catherine said, her own tears flowing freely. "And we will welcome this child together, raise them together, love them together. I am not afraid anymore, Yates. Not of the future, not of losing what I love, not of anything. You have shown me that life is meant to be lived fully, not in fear." They moved into the house in August, even though it was not completely finished. The main structure was sound, and they could complete the details while living there. Catherine set up her kitchen with profound satisfaction, arranging everything exactly as she wanted it. She hung curtains she had sewn and placed wildflowers on the table and stood in the middle of the main room, feeling more at home than she had anywhere else in her life. Raymond and Sarah came to visit, bringing gifts for the new house and congratulations on the baby. Sarah had decided to stay on at the ranch rather than return to school, helping her father manage the business end of the operation. She had grown close to Catherine over the past months, and Catherine had come to think of her almost as a younger sister. Sarah hugged Catherine carefully, mindful of her growing belly, and whispered, "You and Yates are going to be wonderful parents. This baby is so lucky to have you." In December, as the year turned toward its close, Catherine gave birth to a son they named Thomas Yates, after her first husband and her current one. The birth was long and difficult, but Catherine came through it strong, and the baby was healthy and loud. Yates held his son with shaking hands and tears streaming down his face, overcome by the reality of this tiny life they had created. "He is perfect," he said in wonder. "Catherine, he is absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Catherine said, exhausted but happy. "And my stubborn chin, poor thing." Yates laughed, a sound of pure joy, and kissed her forehead gently. "I love you so much. I did not know it was possible to love this much. I know exactly what you mean." They settled into parenthood with all the awkwardness and wonder that new parents experience. Thomas was a demanding baby, hungry and fussy and determined to be held constantly. Catherine was exhausted and sore and happier than she had ever been. Yates helped with everything, changing diapers and walking the floor at night, and learning to soothe the baby with low songs and gentle rocking. He was a natural father, patient and loving, and Catherine fell in love with him all over again watching him with their son. The months passed, winter giving way to spring and spring to summer. Thomas grew from a tiny, squalling infant into a chubby, smiling baby who laughed at everything and loved being outside. Catherine returned to her work gradually, managing the household and helping Yates with the horse breeding operation he had begun. They acquired 3 mares and a good stallion, and Yates proved to have a gift for matching horses and raising quality foals. The small operation began to gain a reputation, and people from neighboring ranches started coming to buy Donovan stock. One afternoon in July of 1880, as Catherine was working in her flower garden with Thomas playing nearby, she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw an unfamiliar rig pulling up to the house. A woman climbed down, an older woman with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. Behind her came a man Catherine recognized with a start as one of the deacons from the Fort Sumner Church. Catherine's heart began to pound, old fears rising despite herself. She picked up Thomas and held him close, waiting to see what this visit might bring. Yates emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of the wagon, and came to stand beside her, his hand resting protectively on her lower back. The woman approached with the deacon trailing behind, and Catherine saw now that the woman's expression was not judgmental but almost apologetic. "Mrs. Donovan," the woman said, "my name is Martha Henderson. I believe you used to rent a room for me in Fort Sumner." "I remember, Mrs. Henderson. What can I do for you?" "I came to apologize." The words were blunt and direct. "I came to tell you that what we did to you, what I participated in by asking you to leave, was wrong. It has weighed on my conscience for nearly 2 years now, and I could not bear it any longer without making amends." Catherine stared at her, stunned. "I do not understand. After you left, things happened that made me see how unchristian we had been. Reverend Hollis's own daughter ran off with a married man, and suddenly he was preaching forgiveness and second chances instead of judgment. Several members of the congregation had marriages fail or children go astray, and we all saw how quickly the tables could turn. And I kept thinking about you, a good woman who had done nothing wrong except survive loss and try to build a new life. We cast you out for being human, for having a past. It was cruel and wrong, and I am deeply sorry." The deacon cleared his throat. "I am sorry too, Mrs. Donovan. We let fear and prejudice guide us instead of compassion. You deserved better from us." Catherine felt Yates's hand tighten on her back, offering silent support. She looked at these people who had hurt her so deeply and waited for anger or bitterness to rise. Instead, she felt only a kind of distant pity. They had let their fear dictate their actions, and in doing so, they had driven away someone who could have been a valued member of their community. Their loss, not hers. "I appreciate you coming all this way to say that," she said finally. "It takes courage to admit when you have been wrong." "Does that mean you forgive us?" Mrs. Henderson asked hopefully. Catherine considered the question carefully. "I forgive you for my own sake, because holding anger only poisons the person carrying it. But I will not forget what happened or pretend it did not matter. You taught me an important lesson about standing up for myself and not letting others define my worth. In a way, what you did led me to this." She gestured to the house, the land, Yates beside her, and Thomas in her arms. "I am happy here, happier than I ever was in Fort Sumner. So perhaps things happened exactly as they needed to." "Mrs. Inuyamis," Henderson nodded slowly. "You are gracious, more gracious than we deserve. I am glad to see you have found happiness. Your husband is a fortunate man." "I am the fortunate one," Yates said quietly. "Catherine is the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. Your loss was my gain, and I thank God every day that our paths crossed when they did." After the visitors left, Katherine stood in the yard, watching the dust settle behind their wagon. Yates wrapped his arms around her from behind, careful of the baby between them, and rested his chin on top of her head. Are you all right? I am more than all right. I am free. Katherine leaned back into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him supporting her. For so long, I carried the weight of Fort Sumner's judgment, even after I left. Some part of me believed they were right, that I was tainted or damaged or unworthy. But seeing them come here to apologize, seeing how small and frightened they were, I realized they never had any power over me except what I gave them, and I am taking it back. That is my brave wife, Yates said, love and pride warm in his voice. You never needed their validation, but I am glad you have found your own. As the summer progressed, Katherine found herself settling ever more deeply into her life. The garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for her to enjoy. The horses thrived under Yates's care, and he sold 2 yearlings for excellent prices. Thomas grew and changed daily, becoming more of a person with his own preferences and personality. And Catherine's relationship with Yates deepened and strengthened, the early passion mellowing into something even more precious, a partnership built on trust and respect and abiding love. In September, Sarah came to visit with surprising news. She had been courting one of the ranch hands, a quiet young man named Peter who worked with the cattle. They were planning to marry in the spring, and Sarah wanted Catherine's advice on household matters and married life. The 2 women sat on Catherine's porch, drinking lemonade and watching Thomas play, and Katherine found herself offering the wisdom she had gained through hard experience. Marry for love, but also for partnership. Make sure you can talk to him, that he listens when you speak and respects your thoughts and feelings. And never let anyone make you feel ashamed of choosing happiness, no matter what form it takes. Did you love Yates right away? Sarah asked curiously. Or did it grow over time? Katherine thought about it carefully. I think I loved who he was from almost the beginning. His kindness, his strength, his decency. But I was afraid to let myself feel it, afraid to hope for anything more than safety. The love I feel now, this deep, abiding certainty that he is my home and my future, that grew day by day as he proved himself trustworthy. Love is not just a feeling, Sarah. It is a choice you make every day to cherish and support and respect the person you have committed yourself to. The feelings are wonderful, but the choice is what makes a marriage last. I hope Peter and I can have what you and Yates have. You make it look easy, but I know it must not be. It is not always easy, Katherine admitted. We have disagreements like any couple, but we have learned to talk through our problems instead of letting them fester, and we have learned to forgive quickly and love generously. That is the secret, I think. Not perfection, but grace. That evening, after Sarah had left and Thomas was asleep, Katherine shared the conversation with Yates. They were sitting together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Yates listened thoughtfully and then said, "You are wise, Katherine Donovan, and I love you more today than yesterday, and less than I will tomorrow." "Where did you hear that?" "From my father, speaking to my mother." I always thought it was the most romantic thing I had ever heard, the idea that love is not static, but grows and deepens with every passing day. "I like that," Katherine said, snuggling closer to him. "And it is true. I love you more now than when we married, and I loved you more then than when you found me on the road to Fort Sumner. How much more will I love you in 10 years? In 20? In 50? I guess we will just have to stick around to find out," Yates said, kissing the top of her head. "I am looking forward to growing old with you, Katherine, to seeing our children grow up, maybe having grandchildren someday, building a life that spans decades instead of just days or months. I want it all with you." "You will have it," Katherine promised. "All of it. I am not going anywhere." The years rolled forward, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. Thomas was joined by a sister, Emma, 2 years later, and then another son, Daniel, 3 years after that. Catherine had her hands full managing the household and raising the children while Yates built his horse breeding operation into a thriving business. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the children and a larger kitchen for Catherine. The garden grew to include an orchard, and Catherine spent happy hours teaching her children to tend the plants and appreciate the miracle of growth. Raymond Dalton became a constant presence in their lives, a beloved grandfather figure to their children, and a dear friend to both Catherine and Yates. When he finally decided to retire and turn the double R over to Sarah and her husband Peter, he built a small house near Catherine and Yates's place, preferring their company and the laughter of children to the loneliness of the big ranch house. Catherine welcomed him gladly, and the children adored him, begging for stories of the old days and climbing on his lap whenever he sat down. Fort Sumner became a distant memory. Its judgment and cruelty faded to insignificance in the face of the full, rich life Catherine had built. She occasionally thought of Reverend Hollis and the townspeople who had cast her out, but without anger or bitterness. They had given her an unexpected gift by forcing her out of the familiar and into the unknown. If they had not rejected her, she would never have met Yates, never have built this life, never have discovered her own strength and resilience. In a strange way, she was grateful to them, though she had no desire to see them again or revisit that painful time. One evening in the fall of 1895, as Catherine and Yates sat on their porch watching the sunset, Thomas rode up on his horse with his own wife, a sweet-natured girl named Lucy from a neighboring ranch. They had married that spring, and Lucy was expecting their first child, which would make Catherine and Yates grandparents for the first time. Emma was courting a young doctor in town, and Daniel, at 13, was already showing signs of inheriting his father's gift with horses. The family Catherine and Yates had created was expanding, growing into the next generation, and Catherine felt profound satisfaction at how everything had unfolded. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been in Fort Sumner that day? Catherine asked Yates as they watched Thomas and Lucy walk toward the creek, hand in hand. If you had not found me on that road? I used to wonder, Yates admitted, but not anymore. I think we were meant to find each other, Catherine. I think everything that happened, all the hard things you endured, and all the miles I traveled, was leading us to that moment. I was exactly where I needed to be at exactly the right time. Experience is not a sin, Catherine said softly, remembering the words that had changed her life. You said that to me the first day we met, and you gave me permission to see my past as something other than shameful. You gave me hope when I had none left. You gave me purpose, Yates countered. Before you, I was just drifting, working hard, but toward no particular goal. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, a reason to dream about a future. You made me want to be a better man. You were already a good man, I just helped you see it. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Catherine thought about the girl she had been, standing in the street in Fort Sumner with her carpet bag and her broken heart, and she could barely recognize her. That Catherine had been so afraid, so wounded, so convinced that she was unworthy of love or happiness. This Catherine, the one who sat here with silver threads in her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes, knew better. She knew that love was worth the risk. She knew that experience, even painful experience, could teach wisdom. She knew that being cast out could actually be a form of liberation, freeing her to find where she truly belonged. Thank you, she said to Yates, taking his hand, for seeing me when I was invisible, for defending me when I could not defend myself, for loving me when I did not believe I deserved it, for giving me a home and a family and a life beyond anything I dreamed possible. Thank you for everything. Yates raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same gentle reverence he had shown that first time. 17 years ago. The privilege was entirely mine, Mrs. Donovan, and if I had it to do all over again, I would not change a single moment. As stars began to appear overhead and the night sounds of the desert rose around them, Catherine leaned her head on her husband's shoulder and let contentment wash over her. She had been cast out for having been married before, branded as damaged and dangerous by people too frightened to see her as human. But a cowboy had looked at her and seen strength instead of sin, courage instead of corruption. He had said that experience was not a sin, and in doing so, he had given her permission to write a new story for herself. That story had become this life, this home, this family. It had become love that deepened with every passing year, children who grew into fine adults, grandchildren on the way, and a legacy that would last long after she was gone. Catherine had survived loss and cruelty and rejection, and she had emerged stronger and wiser and more capable of love than she had ever been. That was not a story of shame. That was a story of triumph. And as she sat there in the gathering dark with the man who had changed everything, Katherine Caldwell Donovan, once cast out and now completely found, knew with absolute certainty that every painful step of her journey had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment of peace.